Quick welcome if you're new here. This is 5 random questions. If this episode makes you laugh, think, or say, oh, that's good, hit follow so you don't miss the next one. And maybe share it with a friend who'd enjoy it too.
I'd say the worst piece of luck, I brought up COVID earlier, and I'd say the timing of that was a really bad piece of luck because I went through a breakup in January of 2020, late January. So just a couple weeks pretty much after I was like, well, I'm single now, I'm kind of depressed about that, but I'm going to get back out in the world and I'm going to get ready. And then it's just like, you're not going anywhere, buddy.
Hi, and welcome to 5 Random Questions, the show with unexpected questions and unfiltered answers. I'm your host, Danny Brown, and each week I'll be asking my guests 5 questions created by a random question generator. The guest has no idea what the questions are, and neither do I, which means this could go either way. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into this week's episode. Today's guest is Derick McDuff. Derick is the host, editor, and producer of the Underrated Movie Podcast, discussing underrated, underappreciated, and under-the-radar films. He also writes about film and pop culture for sites like WatchMojo and Film Threat. So Derick, welcome to 5 Random Questions.
Hey, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
You're very welcome and very excited to have you. As we were saying in Green Room, this season and last season, I'm really looking for new guests I haven't met before, etc. And it's always fun meeting new people. So I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. And as I mentioned in the intro there, obviously as someone who's so keenly attuned to the movie industry, I'm just curious what your thoughts are around the topic of, there's like a discussion going on, maybe for the last 6 months or so, about maybe cinema in the mainstream losing its appeal to certain audiences who are maybe preferring streaming, and now you're seeing movies that are being made exclusively for streaming apps, etc. You got a take on that? You think that's the case or not?
Well, it's interesting because I'm not inherently opposed to streaming movies. I think it's a new avenue, and if you can get more people into film, people who either can't leave the house or it's hard for them or financially it's difficult to go to the movie, whatever it might be, I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. What I think is kind of dangerous is when we're seeing the release window from movies coming out to theaters to being released on, VOD and then streaming getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It used to be 6 months or whatever. And then the exclusivity window, especially if a film doesn't do well, is 2 weeks sometimes. It's crazy small. So I think that it can be a good thing. I know people were freaking out a lot when it looked like Netflix was going to buy Warner Brothers because they were like, oh, this is going to go away. In my opinion, we're in a much worse situation now with Paramount buying Warner Brothers because that's a lot more monopolistic, and there's a lot of things that Paramount is doing that I don't agree with. So, it's kind of one of those things that's like, oh, well, streaming seems bad, but, there's alternatives that are worse. And so I don't have a problem with streaming. I do, though. I still love going to the movies, having that shared theatrical experience, and whatever we can do to keep cinemas alive, I think is a good thing. And I do think that, honestly, streaming does in some ways help keep cinemas alive.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, the release windows are getting much smaller now, which is crazy. I remember you used to have to wait years before a big blockbuster would come out of terrestrial TV, for example.
Yeah.
And now it seems it's almost aligned with the theatre release. And yeah, the movie-going experience, if you got, I always think of something like, a Star Wars or the Daredevil, not Daredevil. Oh my gosh, I've just lost Ryan Reynolds. Who's the superhero? Deadpool. I just lost train of thought there for a moment. So yeah, when Deadpool came out, and obviously Wolverine was in it, and it was crazy seeing the reactions to some of the cameos, for example. And so yeah, there's always a big thing to, big positives to the movie going experience. So hopefully, I grew up as someone that loved going Saturday matinees in the streets of Edinburgh. I hope that stuff like that never changes. And obviously, your podcast is about underappreciated and under-recognized movies, and you discuss that. In your humble opinion, on the flip side, what is the most overrated movie in one that people appreciate? You think, really?
I might have to say Gravity, the Alfonso Cuarón movie. I'm just not a big fan of that director in general. I think that especially that movie, there's not a lot on the page. It's a lot of cool special effects. It's a lot of like, how did they get this shot? But I don't think that there's really that much interesting happening on a script level, or, you know, not to be rude to Sandy B in an acting level. You know, there's a lot of stuff where like she's just kind of going through space and shouting, and she doesn't know what to do until she imagines what man would say to her, and then she can figure it out. Like, I don't think there's a lot there. And when you see it in like the IMAX and the 3D, you know, to talk about theatrical experience, I know a lot of people enjoyed that a lot more than I did. And I think that if you look at its like ratings on Letterboxd and stuff over the years, it's declined steadily because it's not a movie that translates well to a small screen, you know, speaking of streaming again. Whereas, I don't know, you can watch The Godfather on a plane and it'll still be The Godfather. You know, if you watch like Gravity on your phone, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I watched that on a small screen. I think I watched it when it came out. I don't know if it was Netflix, Prime, whatever it may have been. And I kind of enjoyed the premise of it. But yeah, like I say, it's kind of tapered off a bit, and it didn't really do her any justice because of that. So that's a good one. I can go with that one. Hopefully, though, what isn't underappreciated is the randomness of the questions we're about to go through. So with that tenuous link there, are you ready to jump in the random question hot seat, Derick?
All right, yeah, I'm ready. Put me in the hot seat. Let's go.
Alrighty, let's bring up my random question generator. Okay, it's a fairly easy one, I feel, to kick things off with. Question 1, Derick. Do you believe in luck?
Yeah, I believe in luck. You know, I think that, you know, and there's always a thing of like, oh, somebody makes their own luck, but you know, things are always going to happen that are going to be outside of your control. You know, you flip a coin. It's just something could be as simple as like you flip a coin and it comes up heads when you needed it to come up tails, you know, or it could be just, you know, bigger events in your life, things that were unexpected, you know. I don't think any of us were expecting, you know, like lockdown to happen. You know, that was unlucky for everybody. So I think that, you know, just random chance exists in the world. You never know what's going to happen.
Do you feel you can shape your own luck to a degree? Obviously, you mentioned flipping a coin. They're very random. You've got two options. Unless it's crazy weird and you're like the teens that try to do the bottle lid flip and it lands on its edge, which isn't going to happen, let's face it. But do you think you can shape your own luck sometimes where you want something to happen, so you're sort of determining a process almost that might seem lucky. So it might be lucky that you got a really cool job offer, but in the background, you've been dropping little snippets here and there to go for that job and put yourself in the frame kind of thing.
Yeah, I do honestly think that, you know, you can do stuff to, you know, quote unquote, improve your odds, you know, like there's always things you can do, you know, not like if you are like, oh, that was just bad. You just like, you're complaining about your luck all the time. You know, that's a little much, but you know, and there's always going to be things that don't go your way, but you can always work on things, make things go that in your favor. And if things are going really bad, I always think of, you know, we were kind of like, before we got on, talked a little bit about Star Trek 2. I always think of, for people who aren't familiar, there's this test that they put the students through in that movie called the Kobayashi Maru, where it's this no-win scenario where you get put in this situation and you can't win. The only person who ever passed was Captain Kirk, and that's because he cheated and rewrote the situation. And because Kirk says, I don't believe in the no-win situation. And I always think of that. It's like, you know what? No matter what, you're in this bad situation, there's always a way that you can find some way. There's always a path to success. However convoluted and difficult and unlikely it might be, I think you could find a way to succeed at what you're doing.
Yeah, man, that's fair. And I guess then, like, just to sort of ease out of this one, which is a nice one to ease into the 5 questions experience. But if you had to choose of thinking of your own examples, what's either the best piece of luck that's come your way or happened to you, or what's the worst piece of luck that's happened to you?
I'd say the worst piece of luck, I brought up COVID earlier, and I'd say the timing of that was a really bad piece of luck because I went through a breakup in January of 2020. Just like late January. So just a couple weeks pretty much after I was like, well, I'm single now, I'm kind of depressed about that, but I'm going to get back out in the world and I'm going to get ready. And then it's just like, you're not going anywhere, buddy. I think that's not when I think of bad luck. That's always the one I think of.
That, yeah, I can't, I don't have anything to add to that. That's a terrible timing.
I'll say here's some good luck actually that came with that is that I just happened to have right at that same time, my former roommates. So like my best friend's wife's best friend had a cat that she had to find a home for. And so, she knew that I loved cats, and I had a cat like my whole life, for like 20 years, and it died, or passed away a couple of years prior. Lived a long, good life, but I hadn't had a cat since then. And she knew that I would be a good cat owner. And she's like, "Hey, would you like this cat?" And so, all right, it was like April or something of that same year. So it's like, all right, I just happen to have some good luck and I always call her my emotional support cat because I'm just locked inside all day, just thinking about everything. And now I have this noisy animal who just wants love and affection from me. So that was some good luck that I got, I got my emotional support cat.
No, that's good. There was a silver lining there.
Yeah, exactly.
And cats are awesome. They don't bug you too much like dogs can. But when they want to, they're right there for you. So that's
exactly. Yeah.
It worked out well. That's awesome. I like that. And it's like I said, it's a nice gentle way to ease into the random questions. Hot seat time. So on that note, let's have a look at what question number 2 is. Okay, question 2. What is your least favorite part of your day? It doesn't have to be the day, but your day.
It's a good question because I feel like my days are always so different, I guess if it's a day where, because I podcast on art and stuff, but I do have a day job. So I guess it would be a day where I have to go into work, when I have to get ready and leave, because then I've still got my whole 8 hours ahead of me. And it's not like I hate my job. I like my day job, but it's just like that moment of like walking out the door and be like, all right, here we go. Let's get this thing over with, so I think, from there, it's all like, all right, well, I'm in the flow. I'm starting to do stuff, but getting to the point where you're like, you have to force yourself out of bed, walk out the door. It's never fun.
Yeah. And what's it? Is it close to you? I know sometimes people have got like long commutes to their day jobs, etc. Is that part of it, or is that not too bad?
Luckily, it is close. I worked a bit further for a little while. But I am closer now. So at least it's a short commute. And I can listen to podcasts and stuff on the way. So at least I've got that benefit. I know it's rough. Like I always think of my dad when, I was growing up, he had this like hour and a half long commute and too much. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I used to work in Toronto before we moved to where we are now. And my daily commute was 2 hours each way. It was horrible. And that's when I had young kids, like they were super young then. So I was leaving before they got up for breakfast and I was getting home as they were almost getting to bed. I did that for 3 years and I hated it. So I'm with you. I like it. If that was me, that would definitely be my least favorite part of the day for sure. And I guess maybe thinking back to the first question about luck, and you believe in luck, if you were to win the lottery, would you continue? This might be a silly question. Would you continue that job, or would you ease out of that and put more into the podcast and your creative side then?
Oh, I would quit immediately. It's nice to have things that are a little bit tough to get with, like podcasting, like health insurance and a 401k, in the U.S. But that's that. Like I said, I like that job for a job, but this is what we're doing right now. This is my passion. This is what I really, really love to do.
Yeah, well, as someone that podcasts, a serial podcaster, if you like, I'm 100% with you there. I mean, I work at a job that I love. It's a podcasting platform and industry, and I'd probably still work there, I feel, because it is embedded in what I love. But yeah, if it was like a 9-to-5 day job at an office or something like that, I'd be out like you, out like Flynn, and into the creative side. So I hear you on that. So yeah, I feel that's a fair part. I feel maybe most people would say, the least favorite part is taking them away from doing something they really want to do or enjoy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll go with that for sure.
I always say, when I started the podcast like 5 or 6 years ago, it was a hobby, and now it's become a side hustle. It's a way for me to it does afford me the ability to work less hours at work, get some extra money, obviously flex my creative muscles. And then I'm hoping, in another 5 or 6 years, this is my profession. This is, this is what I can do. I'm able to, make enough of between this and the writing and all the other stuff that I don't have to worry about, getting the 401k and the health insurance and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, I feel your podcast as well is very well set up for that kind of thing, where you can also do live events. You can go to movie theaters and have these conversations and these episodes in movie theaters with live audience, etc. So, and maybe have the underappreciated movie playing as the entree, and then you discuss it afterwards. So, yeah, I can see that happening for sure.
Yeah. I've done a couple of those. It's always fun. I've got another one set up for later in the year that I'm looking forward to at a museum.
Now is that? I'm not going to say is that going to be Night at the Museum, because that was an appreciated movie.
Not quite. Although that could be a fun one to do at some point. But that would be a fun movie to do at a museum and talk about.
Yeah, see what comes to life, and then do a follow up, some bonus content. Awesome. I like that one. So let's have a look at what question number 3 brings up. Okay, it's a bit more of not a somber one, but more like a serious one, if you like. But question number 3, Derick. What is your biggest regret?
That's a good question. Obviously, you try to live with as few regrets as possible. But I think, I would, there's, arguments and stuff that you've gotten in with, friends or family members and stuff like that. There's always things you wish you hadn't said to people and stuff like that. So, I just wish that there's times when maybe I've been kinder to people, and I'm not saying, I'm going out and yelling at people every day, but, we all do stuff that we, wish we could take back. And I think that, maybe there's a few times where, I've been in the heat of an argument or something and, said something that I wish I hadn't said. So I can't think of a particular, one, which is, I guess, a good sign. But, I always try to, be more empathetic, be kinder and stuff like that. And, maybe too, like you've had a couple and you're just, you're a little bit more loud and and gregarious than you should be. So I think that probably would be, my regret is just, is being a little bit more loud and obnoxious than I should have been in the past.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that about, having a couple of libations, for example, because my uncle, very typical Scottish man, he'd have a few beers at the weekend and he'd just unload on you with some home truths, they like to call it. And it says, you can always tell when I'm being honest with you, because I'll always just tell you the truth when I've had a few beers. And people say, yeah, but you're not being truthful, you're just being obnoxious. There's two, they're not mutually exclusive. And when you recognize that you've maybe said something in that event, do you feel too embarrassed to apologize after? Do you find that you do kind of make things up, or do you think that I should just let that one go and not bring it back up at all, because it's just bad for everybody?
I think, it's always important to own up to your mistakes. I think that, especially if, it's people that you care about, it's, rather than just sweep it under the rug, it's good to air it out to, because I feel like if the situation's reversed, and if somebody, says something out of line to me or something like that, or, has too many and is speaking some home truths, I definitely appreciate them trying to own up and be a big person and admit their mistakes. And I always try to admit my mistakes, and rather than just, I'm not gonna bring it up because it'll be awkward, apologize, say, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, blah, 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 so I think it is important to be a big person, to realize your faults, and to, hopefully the people that you care about will accept, accept that and take it back into the fold, as long as it doesn't become a recurring thing, as long as you can. I think it's important to look at your mistakes and try and grow and learn from them, because I think as much as my successes have made me who I am, I think, a lot of my regrets and failures have as well. And, you try to be a better person every day.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. The episode that dropped today, Rai Voss is my guest. We were talking about something like that, about time travel or going in the past or something like that. I can't recall exactly how it got to that point. And he's on about he had very active, realistic dreams, if you like. And one was going back in time to warn his younger self not to hook up with his younger wife. But then, to your point, if you do that, then you don't learn from these experiences of what went wrong there. And it helped him, be with his wife, and he's got a child now that wouldn't have happened had that not been the case. I mean, is there anything that in your past that you feel that you really wish you could have a makeover, a do-over with? Or to your point, it would just impact who you are now too much?
Yeah, no, I don't think that I would change anything. I think, like you said, it's something that would impact who you are. And, you think about these big regrets that you have, things that, didn't turn out, like, not to keep going back to it, but they're, when that breakup that I went through right before COVID, you think, oh, well, if I had said this different, then I had done this differently, but then if me and that person don't break up, then I'm not with my current girlfriend, which, I would I'm so much happier now, it was such a good, healthy relationship now. So if I don't go through, a rough breakup and, learn from things, and just about myself and about, relationships in the world and everything. And B, if I'm still with that person who is not necessarily right for me, I'm now with a much better person for me, so I think that it's kind of like what we were talking about before about like making your own luck, is that even if there's situations you get into that are of your own causing that are not great, you can learn from them. You can find a way to go forward, and you can make a better situation for yourself ultimately. Yeah,
it's like that. I don't know what the term is for it, but like you say, it's making your own luck. But it's the changes that could happen. That it's positive that you can impact your life for better at that time, but the negatives could be so huge at this time, now. So I guess it's almost like you're saying, there's things that we regret. Everybody does that, but that's part of just growing and learning and doing better the next time, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's part of being human, like, nobody's infallible, nobody's perfect, and you're gonna make mistakes. And the important thing is to, when you make those mistakes, to learn from them and to grow and to be a better person.
Well, I like that. I cannot add anything onto that at all. That is perfect. So I like that. This part is brought to you by someone awesome. We'll be back with more questions in a sec.
On the Bad Movies Worst Opinions podcast, we review popular movies from the 90s and 2000s just to see if they're as bad as you really remember. We believe that everybody has a favorite bad movie, those movies that you can't help but love even if the critics hate it. So we go back and watch them. Did these movies really deserve the hate, or have people been too harsh all along? Find out every Tuesday wherever you get your podcast from. Check out the Bad Movies Worst Opinions podcast.
Hey there, Danny here, with a very quick interruption. And I promise this is less awkward than it sounds. If you're enjoying 5 random questions and thinking, hey, this was worth at least the price of a coffee, well, you can actually tip the show. It helps keep the lights on, the questions weird, and the podcast proudly independent. Totally optional, no pressure, zero guilt, but hugely appreciated. Just head on over to 5randomquestions.com/support. And whether you donate or not, thanks for listening. And now, back to this week's episode. And speaking of being a better person, we better move on to question number 4.
Very nice segue.
I have to work on these. Some work, some don't, but we'll see.
You know what? You're doing a lot of them every episode, so you know what? Law of averages, there's gonna be one that, but they're great. They're great.
I appreciate that. Question number 4, Derick. What do you want to learn more about?
Ooh, learn more about, because I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to grow. I like to learn a lot about history, honestly. I mean, I that's for like my day to day, just kind of like I like to learn just like interesting, random, fun facts. But I guess on a like kind of like a more related to what we're talking about here, I always want to learn more about how to be a good podcaster, be a good writer, be a good creator. And I think about like I feel, not that I don't feel like I know a lot, because I do. I think I'm very versed. I like to in that same vein learn more about movies, and that's why, because I didn't go to film school or anything, but I watch a lot of movies. Obviously, I listen to a lot of film podcasts. I read a lot of books on film. So when when it comes to podcasting, when I think about the stuff that I know now that I didn't know when I started, I'm like, I didn't know anything. I thought I knew a ton when I started. And so I'm sure that, a few years down the road, I'm like, wow, I was doing this in 2026. I can't believe I was doing that. So yeah, just learning more about the craft and about the medium that I'm covering, I think.
And is there a set, because obviously movies have got, you look at the credits on a movie, end roll, and there's so many people that can be involved. And sometimes you think, really, there was 10 producers on that? Where did that go wrong? So it's like, come back to your overappreciated movie. Is there an aspect in movie making and movie producing, movie promotion, whatever, that you would really, really, ideal job, love to, learn and excel at, I guess?
I would love to learn to be a better screenwriter. I write obviously a lot. I've written some fiction, but I don't think I'm a great screenwriter. I've read a few screenplays. I've read William Goldman's book on screenwriting, which I highly recommend to anybody. I've read some Sid Field stuff. But if I was going to have a job in the film industry, I think I would be a screenwriter for sure. And
because as you mentioned, you write a lot, but there's, apart from just the format, because obviously screenwriting and screenplays are different from, say, written books and journalism. What do you feel is the biggest hurdle, for want of a better word, that makes a great screenwriter from someone that can write a screenplay?
I think it's knowing how to best utilize the medium, because on one level you're not writing this to be read. You're like with so much other writing, you write a book or a poem or something like that. This is meant to be read, or at least spoken verbatim. Whereas a screenplay, you're writing things that are, other than the dialogue, you're writing so much that is very technical. And like you're writing stage direction and all this stuff, and you have to know how to do that. But you also still can't lose that lyricism, which is why I think a lot of really good screenwriters, like I just brought up Bill Goldman, who's my all-time favorite screenwriter, he started as a novelist and kind of accidentally became a screenwriter. So I think you have to have that technical aspect, but you also have to be a really good storyteller. You have to be able to want to, create something that is with a little bit more ambitions, that reads like a novel. Because if you read, William Goldman screenplays, or, there's a reason Shakespeare, his plays are read and studied. Those are things that were never meant to be read like a book, but they still read so well. You can get really engaged with them, even though it's a medium not even meant for that. So I think you have to really have both of those talents in spades.
Yeah, I could imagine. So you mentioned it's like it's setting the scene not only for the actors that are maybe reading it as a read through or first impressions, but I guess you've also got to set the scene in the actor's head because of what could be or should be happening on screen at the time. So if there's a bunch of special effects, I can only imagine what a massive special effects movie might look like from a screenwriting point of view, because you're trying to say, well, this is going to be up here, that's going to be here, there's going to be floating Zargons over here, etc. It's like, it's like, so, kudos to anyone that can do that. You mentioned you've done, or you want to be a better screenwriter. Have you done a few yourself that you've submitted, or is that a goal?
No, I haven't written any screenplays. When I've written fiction stuff, it's usually more like novellas or novels or short stories. I haven't really gone in any screenplays. I would like to maybe work on a documentary, and that's a different thing, you know. But I would love to do like a documentary / video essay kind of thing. I have some ideas for what I want to do with that. It would be cool to write a screenplay, but you know, I think one of the problems with screenplays is not problems with screenplays, but a problem that a lot of screenwriters bump up against is that unless you're directing your own stuff, you know, your vision isn't necessarily going to be realized, which is why I think you see a lot of the best screenwriters are now thought of as some of our best directors. You know, you think of like Alex Garland or like Billy Wilder or something like that. These people who start writing screenplays and they just keep getting frustrated because they're like, well, you did it differently than I was wanting it to do, or you changed this stuff. So they're just like, I'll do it myself. So I think that is one of the things too. And, you know, film is obviously a collaborative process, unlike novels, which is like one person writes the novel, and sure, you might have like an editor or something, but it is really one point of view. Whereas, you know, even if you are the writer and the director, you still have to have the actors saying, you know, the words, and they might, you know, you can't make them say it exactly the way. Like, it's Fincher's always talking about. He's like, yeah, he wants to control his actors so much, which is a different vibe than like Clint Eastwood, who's like, yeah, just kind of like say it however you want to say it. You know, have your own process. I don't care. Which makes sense because Clint Eastwood was an actor, and you know, and you know, these other guys who started screenwriters and stuff like that might have a different opinion. So I'm much more in the like, I want to create a world and just kind of like work on it myself than I'd feel like a screenwriter would do. But it would be something fun, I think.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the relationships between, you know, the different creatives. I've been really enjoying watching a bunch of YouTube shorts, and I'll have to find a full interview, I'm sure it's up there, with Russell Crowe talking about his time in Gladiator and the relationship he built up with Ridley Scott based on bringing that character to the screen, and how, you know, Ridley tried to direct when the first we meet, you know, Maximus, and he's on the battlefield, he's looking up at this imaginary bird that flies off, etc., then that pulls him back to the battlefield, and then how he wanted to, when he finds his wife and his child hanging from the beams, and he wanted Maximus to actually try hold him and touch him, whereas Ridley Scott said, well, that can be pretty dark, but we're not going to go there. And it's been fascinating to watch. You know, I feel without Russell Crowe being the actor in that piece, I don't think it would have been as good a movie. Ridley Scott's a fantastic director, but I don't think the relationship would have worked with maybe another actor, because you could tell Russell Crowe was so involved in this creation, this character.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, when you have creating a character, you really need a strong presence from writer, director, and screenwriter to really make it work. And you need to cast somebody like Russell Crowe with a role that like powerful, because, I mean, I acted before. I was a theater major for a hot minute, and yeah, acting is such an important part of that. And you might even bring, as an actor, something that neither the writer or the screenwriter thought of, you know, something like, speaking of Ridley Scott, I always think of Blade Runner and how Rutger Hauer essentially improvised the tears and rain thing. And it's like one of the greatest, and you hear Rutger Hauer talk about it, he's like, yeah, just tears and rain. I just kind of thought of it, you know, and you know, Ridley Scott is just like, or there's this interview I saw where like the writers of Parks and Rec will be talking like, yeah, we write all these great pages and come up with all these jokes, and then Chris Pratt or Nick Offerman or, you know, whoever would just like say something, just improvise something, and it's just hilarious and gets like a huge laugh out of the room, and it's like something we never thought of, you know. So it is that's one thing I love about film too, is how collaborative it is that you have all of these different people that you need to work together to make a film, and when it really works, it's a magical thing.
No, 100%. And that Parks and Rec, a favourite show, well, not favourite, one of my favourite shows. And yeah, to your point, the blooper reels of that show are just crazy fun. If you have like a good body sense of humour, you want a good laugh, go look at the blooper reels from Parks and Rec. It's just, you mentioned Chris Pratt there, just some of the stuff he comes out with. Very funny guy.
Oh yeah. I will say, just I miss that era of Chris Pratt before he was like, I'm action hero man, you know, like that. He was so funny for him. I mean, he still does that occasionally with the Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, it needs to. It'd be fun to revisit that. I mean, I don't know if it would be fun. Sometimes you just have to leave the past behind, but maybe it'd be fun to revisit that and see what the characters are doing 10 years now. You know, 10 years down the line from the original show timeline or whatever. But great show, and yeah, I'm not as obviously involved in the movie space as yourself. But yeah, when you watch a good movie, you can see when everything's just come together perfectly. And why, if it's underappreciated, why we need a podcast like yours to make sure it gets appreciated, because it's put all that effort in.
Thank you.
So yeah, I like that. I like that. And I feel that's a good time to move on to your final question in the hot seat, Derick. So let's have a look at what question number 5 brings up. Okay, I'm going to go with this one, and I'm not trying to be mean to anybody that might have received this from, but question number 5, what's the worst gift you've ever received?
Oof, worst gift I've ever received. Okay, I think so. My grandpa, when he was still alive, was kind of notorious for buying these really cheap, like, it was before Temu was a thing, but they were very like Temu style gifts. Like, I don't know what website he was buying them from, but it was old man Temu that he was getting these gifts from. And he would always just get us essentially junk every Christmas or whatever. And I remember he got me like this really cheap watch once where the second hand fell off like a day later. I think that's probably the worst gift. Because, like, first of all, I don't even wear a watch. Like, I'm not a watch guy, so he clearly never like knew anything about us, like he was like not really that present in our lives, no disrespect, but he just kind of was like, oh yeah, Derick, he's, I was probably like 20 or something, because he's a young guy. Young guys like watches, at least they did in the 1950s or whatever, so I'll get him a watch. And it was just like something he clearly spent like $10 most on, where it's literally falling apart the day I get it.
I wonder if that's like, I'm sure it must be though. It must be like a generational thing, because I like my wife and I like to buy stuff for our kids just as like a surprise. Nothing major, hopefully nothing Timo-like, but we never know. Maybe it is. And we always think, oh, our son will like that or our daughter like that. And half the time they hate it, and we're thinking, do we even know our kids? And that's our kids, not our grandkids that we see maybe once a blue moon, to hand over a watch or something. So I wonder if that's something as you get older, you're still in the mindset of what you actually would enjoy. And you're given that gift because you think, well, I enjoy it. He or she's my blood and kin. They're bound to enjoy it too.
Yeah, that's interesting, because, I feel like when I'm giving gifts, it's always, I always try to consider what the person would want, but you got to bring your own flair a little bit, like you gotta, because you gotta give it a little bit of personal. There's a reason I got this gift for you. So I think, it can balance too much towards that second thing where it's like, well, I think this is really cool, so they must love it too, and it's especially hard when you don't, like you said, it's different with you have your kids or whatever, but it's like when you don't know somebody super well, you're like, I don't know, what do I get them, like what do they like? And I end up getting people books a lot of the time, because I think books are always like a great gift, but it's like, well, what's your taste? What are you gonna like?
Yeah. And it's funny, like you mentioned the watch, at least it was a manual one, because do they still make digital watches now? I haven't worn a watch for years, but I remember digital was massive at one time, and I don't recall seeing them now. To be honest.
Yeah, I don't think, like I said, I don't really wear watches. I guess people, probably like runners and stuff wear them, and swimmers, and like if you're doing something physical, I think that they're still big with that crowd, but that might be it.
Yeah, and I guess everybody's got a smartphone now anyway, right? Yeah. So you don't, I keep like messing up my kids, because they'll ask what time it is, whatever, and I'll generally be checking time anyway for whatever reason. I'll have a decent idea of what the time is, so I'll reply with the time, but I'll always make it a minute or two off, and they'll say, well, how do you know that? Because of the sun. The sun's overhead at 2 o'clock angle right now, so it's got to be 2 o'clock or whatever. And they don't know I've been checking my phone. They will if they ever listen to my podcast, but they'll never will, so I'm safe there. But yeah, it's like, gifts are funny things, like you say, mate. It's you can make a really good decision, or you can make one that comes from a place of love, but it's just the last thing you would ever treat yourself to. And what about yourself? Have you ever given a bad gift that you made a mistake once you handed it over to the person?
I don't know that I've like necessarily gotten given a bad gift, but I think one of the funnier times when it wasn't bad, but it was like just kind of like, oh, this is weird and awkward, was on Christmas, this must have been 10 or so years ago, because it was when, I don't remember if it was Ted 1 or Ted 2, but one of the Ted movies had just come out. And, my family's exchanging gifts, and me and my brother Marshall are giving each other gifts, and we both happen to have bought each other the Ted DVD. And we opened each other's gifts, and we're like, well, we know each other's taste, I guess.
No, that's good. I mean, at least I guess if one breaks now, you've got the backup one. Or even now, I mean, I guess people still use discs. Like DVDs are still fairly popular.
I'm a big physical media guy. I like to have physical stuff whenever I can. I'm a big believer in that because for a lot of reasons. Partially, it's that collector mindset, but partially it's because it's something you own, something that if I want to watch something, I want to watch, the other day I was wanting to watch Cloud Atlas, and I'm like, well, it's not streaming anywhere. I got the DVD though. I could just throw it on, and it looks a lot better. You don't have to worry about, the quality of a stream or whatever, the internet lagging, all that stuff. You could just put in a DVD, it'll look crisp and precise, and I also love the bonus features. So there's a lot of reasons I love physical media.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've got an old Laserdisc player, so I love now and again just getting out my Criterion Edition Laserdisc of the Star Wars original movie release quality, experience. So yeah, I hear you. And good point about the streaming. It's not always going to be on streaming, and the quality can really suffer depending, who you've got. And Prime just seems to want to throw ads in, even if you've got the $4 a month extra you have to pay to not have ads. They still put ads in there. And they're getting really cheeky now. Some of them are putting ads hard baked into the start of the video. So you can't even skip it. You've got to scroll forward before the movie starts. So physical, digital mediums, yeah, I'll go with you on that one.
Yeah, or if you pause it, there'll be an ad. It's taking a coffee break, grab this or whatever,
Exactly. And maybe I'll have to, I was at a podcast event a few years back and their service was podcasts sound better on vinyl. You could actually download your podcast on a vinyl record, an LP, and just build up. If you've got multiple episodes, you have multiple LPs. But I thought that was a really cool idea, because you get that crispy, crackly sound of an LP, but it's your podcast. But that's kind of cool, I thought.
That's fun. That's cool. That could be a good, novelty gift. That could be something cool. Hey, if you have have a podcast in your life, be hey, I got you this episode for you on vinyl, that'd be cool.
That would be cool. Well, speaking of podcasts and hopefully coolness, it's the end of your turn on the 5 random questions hot seat, and I really do appreciate you taking the time and sharing your answers with some weird and some fun questions there. But this is only fair, Derick, because I've had you on the hot seat for about 45 minutes or so. It's only fair to hand over the question asking baton to you.
Yeah, so my question for you is, if you lived in a fictional world, something from media, whether it be books or TV or movies or video games, whatever it might be, comic books, but you're still a normal person, you're still just a regular guy, so, if you say Harry Potter, you're a muggle, you don't get to go to Hogwarts. If you say Lord of the Rings, you're not an elf, you're just a human living in Rohan or whatever. What fictional world would you choose?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's so many to choose from. So many great worlds. I think for me, I've got a lot of favourite movies. A lot of them are fantasy and sci-fi and, fantastic worlds, etc. I think I'd like to be probably part of the original Star Wars. When it was new, when it was first released back in the 70s and the 80s, I guess, for the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Purely because it wasn't, crazy CGI special editions. It felt like a lived-in universe. All the ships were dirty, the interiors were dirty. You'd go to a dive bar and there'd be fights and everything. It felt real. And I think I'd like to be part of that during the first movie, where the rebels are rising up. They've had some successes because of Rogue One, etc. So they're rising up, and now you're starting to see other countries, other galaxies, other worlds, etc. rise up too. But there's still a lot of danger. So as a human, because it's such a varied, lively galaxy universe, I feel it'd be kind of cool to go there and just see all these wild aliens and these wild vistas and these wild locations that you would never see on Earth as a human, obviously.
Yeah.
You would never go down and speak to a walking rug, right? You'd never, see a big googly eye patron at a bar drinking a little blue milk, etc. So I feel I'm a Star Wars nerd. I love Star Wars through and through. First big movie I saw at the movie theatre as a 9-year-old boy. So it's my childhood. So I feel it's probably a cop out, because it's a simple one. But that would be me, where I could just watch this galaxy, go on around me.
And even if you're stuck on a boring planet or something, and you're like on Tatooine, and you can't get up, you still could go to, like you said, the bar, and there's like all kinds of crazy aliens there, and there's, people playing these, weird instruments and everything. And, who knows, maybe one day you'll see Han Solo walk in or whatever. Even if you're like a normal person, you're a grunt in the rebellion or whatever, living under, in a fascist imperial empire would not be ideal. But other than that, I think that's a pretty good answer.
Well, as well, you've got the Womp Rats. You can go hunting Womp Rats, right? You can go, I think it was Tatooine that they had the pod race on as well, right? From the new, the middle prequel trilogy, I guess. So I guess there's a whole bunch of stuff to do. But yeah, I feel that'd be it. And like you say, I just feel it'd be fantastical just to be in these worlds, because I'm not going to get anywhere. If space travel became affordable and widespread for the human race, I don't think that would happen in my lifetime. That's going to be my kids or their kids' lifetime, for example. So having that opportunity, that'd be good enough for me for now.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I like that answer.
Well, I appreciate the question and taking me back to my Star Wars youth. And as I mentioned, I have really enjoyed having you in the Random Questions Hot Seat, Derick. For people that want to check out your podcast, the other stuff that you do, I know on your website you've got a whole bunch of stuff that you also do as well. You've got another podcast, like each year you come up and, review special episodes, etc., or movies of the year. For everybody that wants to check out all the cool stuff you're doing, where's the best place to connect, find you online, listen to the shows, etc.?
Yeah, like you said, you can go to my website, underratedmoviepodcast.com. That has links not only to Underrated, but the other podcasts that I do. Like, I do one on the MCU called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones. You mentioned that how every year I have a different podcast that I do as a bonus podcast over on my Patreon. So you can also go to patreon.com/underratedmoviepodcast, or on all the social media just by looking up Underrated Movie Podcast. Or, of course, however you're listening to this podcast, we're on all the podcast apps. Just look up Underrated Movie Podcast, and we should come up.
Awesome. And as always, I'll be sure to leave all these links in the show notes. So if you're listening on a podcast app at the moment, or even online on the website, just check the episode show notes out as usual, and all the good links will be there over to Derick's cool stuff. So again, Derick, I really appreciate you coming on 5 Random Questions today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I will say, it is very cool to hear my name pronounced in a proper Scottish accent. It's I don't realize how cool it was, that what I was missing until it happened. So that was very fun.
That is awesome. It's funny. I saw your name and I thought either Scottish background or Irish background. So I'm glad that worked out.
I was very happy. I found out recently. I always thought it was Irish, but I found out recently, more recently Scottish. I did the Ancestry.com thing. Awesome.
Well, again, even that's an added bonus. That's going to be my bonus outtake there for sure. That is awesome to hear. You're very welcome. Thanks for listening to 5 Random Questions. And if this was your first time here, feel free to hit follow and check out past episodes. If you enjoyed this week's episode, I'd love for you to leave a review on the app you're currently listening on. And if you know someone else that would enjoy the show, be sure to send them this way. It's very much appreciated. Until the next time, keep asking those questions.